First of all, know that this presentation on the propositions is not in-depth presentation. What we're trying to do here is to give you an overview of the propositions and encourage you to do some homework on your own. There's a lot of resources, and we listed some on the website when we sent out our, on the MailChimp when we sent our announcement out. And we do have a screen share for this, but I think we'll just go ahead and start because we're running a little bit late. So we're going to be going from 14 through 25, and Proposition 14 is Becky. So Becky, unmute yourself.
Okay. All right.
And you're on.
Okay. Yes, I'm covering, first of all, Michael Vu, that was wonderful. Thank you very much. And then Proposition 14 is the California Stem Cell Research Institute bond. And a yes vote supports issuing 5.5 billion general obligation bonds for the state's Stem Cell Research Institute and making changes to the Institute's governance structure and programs. A no vote opposes issuing the 5.5 billion general obligation bonds for the state Stem Cell Research Institute, which ran out of funds derived from Proposition 71, which was back in 2004 for the new projects, and that they ran out of funds in 2019. So this would be the second Research Institute bond. In 2004, Proposition 71 approved a bond for $3 billion to finance a state government cell research program. The research organization, which was now called California Institute for Regeneration Medicine, which is called CIRM, was created and funded a variety of research projects and clinical trials, much of it through the University of California, which was from San Diego all the way up through San Francisco. There were 5 different colleges at that point, or facilities. Prop 14 now, right, which is the prop now, is asking for 5.5 billion in government bonds to continue stem cell research. These are some of the uses the funds would be put towards. State general obligation bonds would fund grants for educational, nonprofit, and private entities for stem cell and other medical research, including training, stem cell therapy development and delivery, research facility construction, and associated administrative costs. Another thing it would be used for would be, it would dedicate $1.5 billion to research and therapy for Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, stroke, epilepsy, brain, spinal, and central nervous system diseases and conditions such as MS, ALS, mental conditions and diseases, cancers of all sorts, types 1 and 2 of diabetes, and heart disease. Proponents of this Proposition 14, the person that they named as a primary proponent is Robert Klein. He's the stem cell advocate. This medical revolution holds the promise of restoring health and quality of life for many of California's individuals and families suffering from chronic diseases and injury. However, the last mile to bring these therapies to patients requires more funding and the support of California's public as the human trials and discoveries are refined and tested, overcome numerous obstacles or complications, and ultimately serve to improve the life and reduce the suffering of every one of us. Opposition to or no on Prop 14, there were 3 oppositions that were listed. The first one was Marcy Darnovsky. She's the executive director for the Center of Genetic and Society. She feels that the proposition does nothing to address built-in conflicts of interest or a lack of legislative oversight, despite the fact that these are public funds. She feels stem cell research is valuable, but there are no longer federal funds available that would, back up the California funds. Today, California faces an enormous budget deficit and proposals to slash higher priority social programs that benefit us all, especially healthcare costs. And then the other two were newspaper type ones, the Orange County Register Editorial Board and the Bakersfield, California Editorial Board. And they both were similar in their oppositions. So I just wrote about both of them at the same time. It said they were in opposition because they had similar opposition, saying that California residents struggling with COVID-19 and increasing state budget deficits, public service cuts, and the economic recovery imposing new costs. So it would be unwise at this time to okay this bond issue. And that covers it. Thank you for your patience and listening.
Okay, thank you very much. The next proposition is Patty. Patty's going to give you the synopsis of 15.
Yes, this is the battle over commercial property tax. In 1978, voters in California passed Prop 13, which limited property tax to 1% of assessed value and limited increase in assessed value to 2% per year. The assessed value only resets upon sale of the property. This reduced the revenues for local government and school districts by about 60%. Prop 15 seeks to create new rules for assessing properties of 3 million or more, and this would only affect commercial properties. Individual homeowners and small businesses would not be affected at all by the passage of Prop 15. It is one of the two ballot measures that would adjust the original Prop 13, the other being Prop 19. This could bring in much needed new money to our schools and local governments. One nonpartisan analysis estimated it could be as much as $12.5 billion a year. This measure is supported by a broad coalition of federal, state, and local officials, advocacy groups, and the California Democratic Party. It is opposed by the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, who were the original group to spearhead Prop 13 in 1978. It is also opposed by the California Chamber of Commerce, the California Business Roundtable, and many large businesses. This will be an expensive and bitter battle for your vote. A yes vote would be a vote to adjust assessments on large commercial businesses, providing new revenues to our local institutions. A no vote would leave us with the status quo and no new revenues. Thank you. That's it.
Okay, thank you very much. So Faith is doing 16. Faith, are you there? Let's see.
Unmuted.
Oh, okay.
I
There you
need,
go. You're unmuted, Faith.
okay, thank you. Proposition 16, a return to affirmative action. It's been 24 years since California voters considered whether race, ethnicity, and gender should be considered in awarding government contracts and admission to state universities and colleges. The politics and demographics of the state were far different in 1996, when such considerations were outlawed with Proposition 209. That was an amendment to the California Constitution. Dr. Shirley Weber has introduced the legislation that would become Proposition 16, stating that the ongoing coronavirus pandemic, as well as recent strategies of police violence, is forcing Californians to acknowledge the deep-seated inequality and far-reaching institutional failures that show your race and your gender still matter. This is probably an opportunity, an opportune time given for people who are interested in politics.
Great.
We would win by a landslide if we let people know what affirmative action is really about. The Democratic Party is endorsing a yes vote on Proposition 16. This ballot measure is only 9 words long. It would simply repeal Proposition 209, allowing the practice often described as affirmative action to again be used in the state. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Faith. Prop 17, Elaine.
Proposition 17 would allow parolees to vote. There's a big difference between probation and parole in criminal justice in California when it comes to the right to vote. Probation is part of the sentence handed down and often allows those convicted of a felony to avoid time behind bars. On the other hand, parole begins upon release from prison in advance of when the sentence ends. The California Constitution allows someone on probation to vote, but removes the voting rights of a parolee until parole has been completed. This proposal, placed on the ballot by the legislature, would remove that restriction and allow a person on parole to vote. Rules barring parolees from voting vary by state, though the trend has been toward restoring those rights. A survey conducted by a pro-voting rights group last year estimated that the ban on parolees voting in elections affects about 40,000 Californians. So we could increase the electorate by at least 40,000 if we allow parolees to vote. Ballotpedia states that as of 2020, 19 states allow convicted felons on parole to vote. For the fiscal effects, Proposition 17 would increase the workload for county election officials. They would have to process these new parolee voter registrations and send the ballot materials to them. The annual county cost for this would likely be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. It would also create a one-time workload for the state to update the voter registration cards and systems. It's estimated that this would also result in one-time state costs in hundreds of thousands of dollars, but this amount is less than 1% of the state's general fund budget. An argument in favor is that having voting rights restored can be an incentive for parolees to re-enter and contribute to society. Supporters include Kamala Harris, Lorena Gonzalez-Fletcher, and Shirley Weber. An argument against it from Republican State Senator Jim Nielsen is that, quote, for those who commit heinous crimes, part of their sentence is to complete the parole period before being allowed to vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So Bonnie's going to do Prop 18. Bonnie?
Thank you very much. I requested to speak to you about California Proposition 18, which is the primary voting for 17-year-olds amendment. The ballot title is as follows. It amends California Constitution to permit 17-year-olds to vote in primary and special elections if they will turn 18 by the next general election, which this year we all know will be November 3rd, and be otherwise eligible to vote. A yes vote supports this constitutional amendment to allow 17-year-olds who will be 18 at the time of the next general election to vote in primaries and special elections. A no vote opposed this constitutional amendment, thereby continuing to prohibit 17-year-olds who will be at 18 at the time of general elections. Those that support the amendment are the California Association of Student Councils and the San Francisco Chronicle Editorial Board. They say young people whose birthdays fall between the primary and general elections are currently at a disadvantage. Without full exposure to the election process, they are unable to submit their most educated vote in the general election. It would ensure that a greater number of citizens would be able to use their voice. Those people that oppose is the Election Integrity Project California, and once again, the Orange County Register Editorial Board. They say 17-year-olds are legal minors. Under that definition, they are still considered children. They are almost all still living at home and under the strong influence of their parents. This is not conducive to independent thought and voting without undue pressure from their superiors, such as parents and teachers. As of June 2020, this year, 18 states, along with Washington, D.C., allowed 17-year-olds who will be 18 by the time of the general election to vote in primary elections. You would think this would be the East Coast and the West Coast, but it is not. It is states such as Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, Nebraska, Mississippi, North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, and others. So I have been a voter registration volunteer throughout the Sweetwater School District and others. I will support this proposition. Our youth are much more engaged in politics and have many resources for truthful information in order to make smart choices when they vote. The Democratic Party is asking that you vote yes on this proposition. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bonnie. So Proposition 19, Laura?
Proposition 19, property tax transfers, exemptions, and revenue for Wildlife Agency Counties Amendment. If approved by voters, California homeowners who are age 55 or older can purchase a new home and keep their property tax payment at the same level or at a reduced rate, depending on the value of the new home. The impact is clear. Older Californians who might otherwise be reluctant to change homes and pay higher property taxes would receive a new tax break. Proposition 60, which passed in 1986, allowed the transfer of the property tax within certain counties only. This amendment expands this to all counties in California. Proposition 19 also expands the property tax break for older homeowners who lose their home to a wildfire, a program now limited to other kinds of natural disasters. It also expands tax benefits for transfers of family farms. The ballot measure also cracks down on the transfer of home from a parent to an adult child in which the property tax payment doesn't change. It would narrow the tax break to homes being lived in by the new owner and would place a new limit on how much of a home's value could remain unchanged when the property was transferred, thus preventing homes being passed to a family member who then uses it as a rental property and sometimes charging monthly rents much higher than the annual tax payment. Most of the resulting revenues collected by narrowing this tax break would go towards local firefighting efforts. This amendment was passed by the California State Legislation. It is supported by California Association of Realtors and the National Association of Realtors. The only opposition I could find was from the Orange County Register editorial board and the Mercury News and East Bay Times editorial boards. They feel it is not fair to the property heirs. The Democratic Party endorses a yes vote on Proposition 19.
Thank you. So Proposition 20, Lachey. Is Lachey, there you are.
I'm here. All right, Proposition 20, tougher on parole and property crimes. California voters have weighed in twice in recent years to reduce the punishment for crimes considered by existing law to be among those less serious than violent felonies. In 2014, Proposition 47 was passed to reduce the penalties for some theft and drug crimes. In 2016, Proposition 57 offered a chance for parole to some serving prison sentences for crimes that don't fall on the state's list of violent crimes. Both laws have been the subject of intense debate over whether they are the right step toward reducing the prison population and promoting rehabilitation, or a strong step that has led to an escalation in crime by repeat offenders. This ballot measure will place a new limit on some of the sentence reduction included in Proposition 47 and Proposition 57. It would allow some theft-related crimes to be charged as felonies, and it will create two new crimes: serial theft and organized retail theft. Both crimes could result in more jail time. Proposition 18 also would change the 2016 parole law championed by then Governor Jerry Brown, which blocked inmates convicted of crimes, including human trafficking and solicitation, from being considered for early release. It would also change some of the rules that must be followed by the State Board of Parole Hearings and community probation programs. And it would expand DNA testing to require samples be taken from some people convicted of theft and domestic violence. If you choose to vote yes on this particular proposition, which is basically talking about prison spending initiative, you will be agreeing to repeal key aspects of public safety realignment for Proposition 47 and Proposition 57. And by you agreeing to do so, it will result in more prison and jail time by one, prohibiting people in prisons from being rehabilitated on their own before they are being released. It would also increase the incarceration rate for low-level offenses, and it will be returning people to prison for a non-criminal violence of their probation. And you would also add a lot more felonies to people for their current record. And if you vote no on that, you will not be agreeing to do all these things that I just mentioned. So as of right now, the primary people that are supporting this legislation is the Reform California and CaliforniaMatters.org. But however, a large number of our legislative body is completely opposed to this, as this legislation will increase the incarceration rate for all minority students. Well, not students, but minority people as well. And it will take us back to where the state doesn't want to go. And it will be increasing our prison budget, as they have cut the budget tremendously. And the population of people that were in prison before was over, it's like 180,000. And since this proposition, since the Prop 47 and 57, they were able to lower our prison population down to about 130,000. So, and it's helping our state to, of course, save some money and apply the funds to some of the key areas for which we currently see now. So, once again, a yes vote will increase the incarceration rates and add additional felonies, and a no vote will keep things where it is and help the state move forward in trying to reduce our incarceration rate and ensure that people are able to be properly rehabilitated when they come home.
Okay, thank you. So Ellie has Prop 21.
Okay, thank you. Prop 21 is the local rent control initiative. Rent control, as you know, is a government-imposed cap on what landlords can charge their tenants. Growing concerns over California's lack of affordable housing have made this a hot topic. Just a bit of background, in 2018, there was a Proposition 10 on the ballot for rent control, and that was defeated. And then in 2019, AB 1482 was signed into law by Newsom, which is a rent control initiative. So what does the Proposition 21 do? First of all, it amends the state law, which is AB 1482, to allow local governments to establish rent control on residential properties over 15 years old. It allows local limits on annual rent increases to differ from current statewide limit. It also allows rent increases in rent-controlled properties of up to 15% over 3 years at the start of new tenancy. It exempts individuals who own no more than 2 houses from new rent-controlled policies. Now, who supports the proposition? Michael Weinstein is the president of the AIDS Healthcare Foundation, and he's the one who sponsored the proposition. And he says, among the 17 million renters in California, the suffering is unabated. Not only do we see increased homelessness, but the affordability crisis has reached epic proportions, with many people paying 50% or more of their income to keep a roof over their head. Bernie Sanders is also listed as one of the supporters. And who opposes it? Well, big unions of carpenters and electricians, real estate groups, AMVETS, California Chamber of Commerce, the California Taxpayers Association, and Howard Jarvis. And here's a quote from someone, Sid Lackereddy, who is the president of the California Rental Housing Association. He says, "It has been proven time and again that rent control does not work. Voters overwhelmingly rejected the 2018 rent control initiative, and Michael Weinstein's second attempt will also be rejected. We do not need more distractions and resources spent on failed policies, but instead we need policies that encourage more affordable and accessible housing." So in summary, if you vote yes on Proposition 21, you are voting for the rent control initiative. And if you vote no, you are voting just to keep AB 1482 as it is.
Thank you. Thank you. So I am 22.
No, that's good.
So Prop 22 is a special workplace rules for the gig economy proposition. Its formal title is App-Based Drivers as Contractors and Labor Policies Initiative. The bitter fight over designating a worker as an employee or an independent contractor dominated the final days of the legislative session in Sacramento last year. The resulting law, AB 5, imposed new criteria to determine the correct employment status for what was estimated to be 1 million Californians. AB 5 wasn't the end of the battle, with critics arguing that additional flexibility is needed for a variety of professions, because so many people in the state of California work as independent contractors. Few are as unhappy with the law as the app-based companies Uber and Lyft, which joined forces to immediately file a ballot measure creating another set of rules that would apply to their drivers. In its simplest form, Prop 22 would clearly designate those drivers to be independent contractors, contrary to what Democratic legislatures and union members that backed AB 5 intended. But the companies wrote the ballot measure in a way that would offer those drivers several new smaller benefits than they would have had if they had been actual employees. Some of those benefits are: drivers would be guaranteed an hourly wage slightly above the minimum wage for time spent driving, a monthly health insurance stipend for some drivers based on hours they worked per week, new medical and disability benefits if a driver is injured while driving, and new rules pertaining to rest periods, sexual harassment, and criminal background checks. In doing so, the ballot measure would distinguish the rules for app-based contractors applying for work under the sections of the California economy. So who is opposed to this proposition? The opposition to the proposition is very wide and comes from a lot of Democratic interests. It is opposed by Biden and Harris, Anthony Rendon, California Speaker of the Assembly, most of the unions, the Gig Workers Rising organization. It is supported by Lyft, Uber, DoorDash, a variety of chambers of commerce. It's of note that this proposition was paid for with $180 million that were raised between the gig economies and other special interests. It was the largest amount ever raised for a proposition in the state. The money that was spent opposing it was $4,611,000, and as I said, is widely opposed by the Democratic Party. An interesting situation is that our Assemblywoman Lorena Gonzalez drafted another bill, which is Assembly Bill 2257, to try to expand the number of gig workers who would be covered under this proposition, under AB 5, and would refute the Proposition 22. So this proposition, AB 225, you'll hear more about, and it did pass through the Assembly and the House and was signed by Governor Newsom last Friday. So you're going to hear a lot more about the lawsuits involved with this proposition. If you vote yes for the proposition, what will happen is that the ballot initiative will pass, and the gig workers that belong to the transportation Uber Lyft industry will be classified as independent contractors. If you vote no, then the California Assembly Bill 5 will stand, and with the addition of the changes that have been made in Assembly Bill 2257. It's a lot to sort out, and the supposition is that there will be a lot of lawsuits going forward involving this. All right, so next is Proposition 23, which is Nadia.
Hi, good evening. I have Proposition 23. And before I start, I'd like to advise you all that there are over 70,000 people in California alone that go through dialysis. Dialysis is given for kidney treatments and kidney failure, and disproportionately affects Black and brown people the most in our state. Ballot 23 would like to have a minimum of one licensed physician present at the clinic while patients are being treated, with an exception of where there is a bona fide shortage of physicians. That does include nurse practitioners and those qualified. It's to report data on dialysis-related infections to the State Health Department and National Security Safety Network, which I can tell you as somebody that lost a grandmother to an infection caused by dialysis, it is something that is extremely important to maintain the numbers. Require the principal officer of the clinic to certify under penalty of perjury that he or she is satisfied after review that the submitted report is accurate and complete, which is something that you should ask of all your medical health clinics. And provide a written notice to the State Health Department, obtain consent from the State Health Department before closing a chronic dialysis clinic. The ballot measure would also state that a chronic dialysis clinic cannot discriminate with respect to offering or providing care, nor refuse to offer or to provide care on the basis of who is responsible for paying for a patient's treatment, which means those with Medi-Cal, those with state-funded assistance will not be turned away from something that is life-saving. We do want to add that SEIU UHW West is a labor union, and they are the one that presented the proposition. But opposing it is two large corporations that run 75% of the dialysis clinics in California and maintain the same amount and percentage of patients. Those two opposing it are DaVita and Freshness Medical Care. There are organizations like AMVETS Department, California Medical Association, the American Legion Department of California, and the California NAACP State Conference that also oppose it. But the basis is that it will raise healthcare costs. We have to ask ourselves, in one of the richest states in the United States, why we have such healthcare costs to begin with. We need healthcare for all. And this starts with us making sure that dialysis clinics are responsible for their patients and held responsible for things that they do. Thank you.
Thank you. That's great. Okay, and Prop 24, Jean. Let's see where Jean is. Jean, you have to unmute yourself. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep, can hear you.
I don't know how I managed to mute it. Anyway, it has to do with the privacy laws, and they want to tighten them up and make it harder for businesses to share your private information. Now, it already was passed a couple of years ago in 2018, and you probably have noticed that you've gotten a lot of privacy information from your banks and businesses. But this will make it even stricter. For one thing, the businesses won't have as much leeway in violating the privacy laws. They used to give them a 30-day notice to discontinue sharing personal information. This will penalize them if they share it right away once it's discovered. And I'm going to read just the first paragraph. California's sweeping new consumer privacy law went into effect in January, and strict state enforcement began on July 1st. It gives individuals much more control over data collected by a variety of businesses. Consumers must be told if data is being collected or sold. They can ask that their information be deleted, and businesses are prohibited from charging more to customers who ask for more privacy. This is supported by one man who's a real estate developer in San Francisco, and he's the main contributor to this law. But it would hurt businesses like Amazon and Facebook, who do share all your personal information. And I know you've probably noticed that as soon as you order something, other advertisers will come to you for that same service or product. And this will limit that somewhat. And then it will cost to have an agency funded by the state to investigate this, and it will be under the state attorney general. And that's going to cost at least $10 million a year, which of course they like to point out is just a fraction of a percentage of the budget. But it will also make it a little bit more difficult for businesses to adhere to these new regulations. So the yes vote means more privacy for your personal information. A no vote means the practice will continue the way it is now. The practice of businesses sharing your personal information. Sorry about the throat. It's allergies.
Okay, thank you very much. And the last proposition is Karen. See where Karen is.
She's there. I see you.
Karen, you got to unmute yourself.
Okay, I'm unmuted.
Okay, good.
Thank you, Claire. And I'm the last one, everybody. So I am Proposition 25, and this is a yes or no vote on cash bail. Now, this measure is a referendum, which is a special kind of ballot measure, asking the voters whether to approve or reject a law that was passed by the legislature. In this case, it's the fate of a 2018 law abolishing cash bail in California. Companies representing the bail industry quickly gathered signatures on a referendum after the law was signed. The bail companies were not happy about this law. They were going to lose all their business. So they gathered all these signatures, and as a result, it's been on hold and is awaiting a final decision by voters this fall. That the bail companies sought a second opinion isn't surprising. This historic law would eliminate the industry's practice of offering cash to those who can't afford to pay for early release. Instead, the law gives judges wide discretion to decide who can be released prior to trial, not who can pay for it. Defendants seem to be defendants that deem to be a danger to the community could be held under a policy known as preventative detention and wouldn't be released on bail. So who supports and who it doesn't support it? So a wide array of state officials, including California's Chief Justice, support the law. Civil groups, civil rights groups in particular, say that the cash bail system too often has led to decisions based less on public safety and more on the ability to pay. And voters who say yes on this measure will be giving their approval of the law to end cash bail. Voters who say no will be rejecting the law and affirming the system as it exists now and has for decades. So that's Prop 25. Yes, that's a yes or no on cash bail.
Thank you. Well, thank you everyone for the presentations. That was, it was an awful lot to digest in a short amount of time.